The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
As many in the audience might remember, when SpaceX and Tesla CEO Elon Musk went on the Joe Rogan program and smoked pot, I panicked and sold half of my Tesla stock. And I'm sort of being cartoonish about it. I didn't literally sell it because he smoked pot. But from what I recall, Pat, after that happened, it brought a lot of attention onto him and his role as the CEO of Tesla, and the stock started to decline. And I remember panic selling like half the stock, which I had had for a long time. And then I think it ended up going back up. So I think this is exactly why I say don't invest in individual stocks.
Well, didn't the stock tank not only because Elon Musk smoked weed on Joe Rogan's program, but also because he flirted the idea of making Tesla, or was it SpaceX, private?
I think it was taking Tesla private at like $4.20 a share with Saudi Arabian investors or something.
Yeah, and then eventually he was fined by the SEC. So there was a number of factors going on at once. I don't think it was solely the fact that he was smoking weed on Joe Rogan's podcast.
No, it wasn't. That makes my decision a little bit less crazy, but I just should have held, I think, in the end. But in any case, this is why I say invest in mutual funds and don't touch them and don't trade or do anything like that. So it turns out that there were more repercussions to the smoking pot. SpaceX happens to be a U.S. military contractor with security clearances. The federal government of the United States doesn't like marijuana. We know this. And in this case, they ended up spending $5 million in taxpayer money to demonstrate that they don't like marijuana by deciding that it would require SpaceX as well as Boeing to go through a safety audit and a cultural review to ensure, among other things, that they're adhering to a drug-free environment. And that cost about $5 million. So what's interesting about this is no policy actually changed, but it's one of those things where, strictly speaking, government contractors are supposed to adhere to this policy, but it's not, the government is not always going in and enforcing or testing it. And they decided to, and that's very expensive. So you, me, everybody, all of us, Pat, ended up contributing $5 million as a result of Joe Rogan getting Elon Musk to smoke pot.
Yeah, total waste of money. And I honestly don't blame Joe Rogan. I don't blame Elon Musk. I blame the government on this one for spending and wasting the taxpayer money like they did with this. I don't think it makes any sense at all. Like, I mean, the federal government has made the decision, at least under the Obama administration, that if states legalize marijuana, they're not going to interfere. Right. So they're not going to have the feds go in and raid the pot shops in California and Massachusetts.
Yep.
It's not as if Elon Musk was smoking weed in a state where it was illegal. He was doing so in California, which is a state that has legalized it. If the federal government has decided that individuals in those states should be able to sell and smoke marijuana, shouldn't NASA also follow the same rules? Shouldn't NASA just turn a blind eye to this? Why do they care so much?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, anytime you see that there's going to be a cultural review, it's like, what are we really talking about here? You're talking about the sort of arbitrary enforcement of often what are really like vestiges of social conservatism in some way. And I don't know that we're ever going to really make total sense out of it. Now, I'm trying to think back. Do you remember when it was that the pot smoking incident took place? Was it 2017?
No, this was almost like, this was maybe a little bit over a year ago. I would imagine I think it was September of last year.
September, because I'm looking now at the price chart of Tesla stock. I see where there was the initial decline in early September, and then it pretty quickly recovered. But then since then, it actually has been on the decline. So maybe it wasn't the worst decision in the world for me to sell half my Tesla stock at the time. But again, I mean, listen, individual stocks make up a very small portion of my investments. It's risky. Most people are just not good at picking stocks, and I don't think that it's the way to go. And maybe my trading decisions are evidence of that.
Yeah, I think you have to give a lot of disclosures when covering a story like this, because you have to talk about how you're invested in Tesla.
Yes.
And you have to talk about how you were on the Joe Rogan podcast yourself.
Right.
So there's a lot of conflicts of interest here, I think, that you have to address. And did he try to push you to smoke pot on camera? I don't think that would have been a good look for you.
You know what happened? A weird thing happened. So the day that I was on the Rogan program, he was running late. So I ended up getting to his studio well before he did. And he was clearly busy, and I knew that he had some comedy shows the night before. And so it all felt more rushed. Like, we didn't take a picture with me holding his sword, which a lot of people asked about, or the fake flame, or I guess it's a real flamethrower. I don't even know.
From Elon Musk.
Right. Yes, exactly. From Elon Musk. it was all very, very rushed. And within like 2 minutes of him getting there, we were taping the episode and there wasn't very much hang time. So there wasn't even really an opportunity for pot to be offered.
I do watch a little bit of the Joe Rogan Experience, and sometimes the guest will complain on air, like once they start recording, like, "Hey, Joe, you just walked into the studio, and now we're already filming." And Rogan, I'm sure he's a busy guy, but he says that he does that because he finds that the best conversation is sometimes when two people just initially meet and they first sit down together. So he wants to make sure that that's on camera.
Yeah,
maybe
that
that's
makes
why
sense.
he did that with you. I think that makes sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, anyway, maybe someday I'll be back on and it'll be more relaxed. Afterwards, though, I hung out a little bit. He was just shooting pool and having coffee, and I just hung out. But then I had things to get to. It's not just Joe Rogan who's busy, Pat, please. Not that you mentioned anything to the contrary, but I figure I have to argue with someone here. Okay, let's talk about so-called fruit drinks. I think you all probably know that a lot of those fruit drinks have very little fruit and have a lot of sugar and aren't very good for you. And there is a new study that looked at fruity drinks with added sugars in 2018. The report is called Children's Drink Facts 2019. It's from UConn's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity. And it found that 2/3 of the 34 sweetened drinks that were analyzed contain no juice, but 85% of them have pictures of fruit on there. Most drinks that have juice have no more than 5% juice. They will often have messages like good source of vitamin C, which may be true because it's been added, but it's not actually coming from fruit because they often have no fruit whatsoever. So nothing here is surprising, Pat. It's like the results are, these are high sugar drinks. These are high calorie drinks. The imagery suggests that they are healthy, that they are like eating fruit. Kool-Aid is a big one. Capri Sun is another one. It's just bad. The ads are often depicting children having and enjoying the drinks. It is being marketed directly to kids. I used to drink some of this stuff. When I was younger, I would love it when I would go to camp if I'd have a Capri Sun. And I remember struggling to put that angled straw in the pouch and eventually sucking out that sweet, sweet goodness or whatever. But it's so unhealthy. And I've fortunately kind of lost the taste for it, where I tried like a sip of some sweetened thing a year ago, and it was cloying. It was so sweet. And it's just bad. And, you know, I struggle with, if I have a kid, accidentally or otherwise, and of course, as former producer Lewis said, if I accidentally had a kid, I'd probably love the kid. All of that stuff remains. But what about these sodas and sweet drinks, which I had as a kid, and I realized they're not good. And since about age 15 or 16, I just stopped having them altogether. Would I just block my kid from having them, particularly knowing that it makes it a sort of forbidden fruit, for lack of a better term, which then they may seek out clandestinely? I don't know. I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, that would be tough as a parent, because I mean, I think the easy thing to do would be, if you're packing your kid's lunch every day, you just put water instead of a Capri Sun into their lunchbox.
Right.
So that you can sort of control. But if the kid is over at a friend's house, who's to stop them from having a Capri Sun or a soda?
Right.
It just goes to, I mean, it all just has to do with how much of a strict parent you want to be. And yeah, these things are loaded with sugar. I had them too growing up. I had Capri Suns packed in my lunchbox, and now I think they're just utterly disgusting. And part of it has to do with the amount of sugar in them. So like the average fruit drink has 16 grams of sugar. And remember, these are small servings here.
Yeah.
But sometimes they have even more, like Minute Maid lemonade that has 21 grams of sugar, and kids are only supposed to have 25 grams of sugar in a day. So you're getting almost to that maximum with only one small fruit drink. And I think maybe parents just figure that these fruit drinks are healthy, not only because they're marketed as like juice, but also because they're not soda. Like, I mean, maybe that has something to do with it, that kids have to drink something, and they just don't see water as a viable option for whatever reason. If they're not going to give their kids soda, they'll give them a fruit drink instead.
I think there's a combination of things going on. I think it's the impression that it's less bad than soda. I think it is that the parents also fall for the same marketing. The marketing doesn't just work on kids. It might also the parents might also fall for it. And number three, you know, I'm not a parent, but I know enough parents to know it eventually gets exhausting to argue about everything. So at a certain point, you're going to pick your battles. And it's like, listen, if maybe they're eating a mostly healthy, solid food diet, You're going to let them have some of the drinks, assuming that they're also getting out and moving around enough. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to criticize any parents. I'm actually trying to think thoughtfully about what I would do, because it is exhausting to argue about every damn thing with your kid.
Yeah, and it's tough to just say drink water instead. They may not be so happy with that.
Yeah.
Whenever you like hear advice from nutritionists who want to help their clients lose weight, be them adults or kids, they always say don't drink your calories.
Right.
Like if you're going to go out to eat, have water. If you're going to make a meal at home, just have water instead. That's pretty much what I do. I have water and coffee. That's about it for me. I don't drink much sugar when I have a beverage.
No, you know what I do admit though, lately I've been I got some really great chai tea. Love chai tea. Turns out, I thought chai tea was its own kind of tea, but I guess it's just a type of black tea with cardamom and a couple of other spices. In any case, who cares about that? I do admit I've been making my own chai lattes with chai tea and 1% milk. Please, of course, I'm no savage. And then I do put in a little bit of honey. And it is a form of sugar. Everybody likes to pretend, hey, listen, if it's honey, it's fine. But I do admit that I am slightly sweetening my chai tea.
Wow, yeah, I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, you spent the last few minutes talking about how we shouldn't be getting kids these fruit drinks,
yes,
and that these are so bad for your health, and then it turns out that you're having these chai lattes with 1% milk. I mean, what am I supposed to do here?
Yes,
I don't know. I don't know how to respond to that.
All right, well, we'll let Pat recover from that. Big things happening in Chicago that are both representations of workers' rights, but also potentially problematic for children, because Chicago, which is the country's third biggest school district, has canceled classes as 25,000 educators are striking today. The Chicago Teachers Union has a number of demands about class size being too big, not enough support staff, larger raises than what are being offered. And in Chicago, there is a very problematic reality where, because of the population that goes to the schools, 75% of Chicago public school students qualify for free or reduced lunch. There is gang violence in a lot of the neighborhoods. When the classes are canceled, there are kids who now may be missing lunch because they are relying on getting that free or reduced lunch at school. There are kids who will be hanging around all day in environments of violence and gangs. And so this is a double-edged sword, Pat. We obviously want to support teachers they have a right to strike. They have a process by which they negotiate collectively. And we defend that 100%. And we also recognize that the strike in and of itself is really bad for a lot of kids who may end up going hungry as a result of the teachers not going in and classes being canceled. I'm not blaming the teachers. I'm merely pointing out that these are dynamic, multi-pronged issues that we are dealing with.
Yeah, and apparently the students can still go to school because there'll still be administrators working at the school. So, if they're depending on the schools for their breakfast and lunch, they can still go to the school and get those. However, the buses aren't running.
Right.
So if you rely on the bus to get to school, chances are you're not going to be able to get there another way.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, like, would teachers willingly send their kids to the schools knowing that would parents send their kids to the schools knowing that there's not going to be teachers there? Maybe not. Maybe they would just figure that there's really no point because they're not going to be learning anything. Maybe they'd just be sitting in class a whole day watching movies or something like that. Yeah, I totally agree. It's a catch-22. It's a double-edged sword. I think at a certain point the teachers have to make a stand, though, and I think they know better than anyone else that how this is going to affect the kids negatively. And I don't think certainly like striking is a last resort, but I guess they've made that calculation and figured out that that's the way to go with this.
There's so many things related to this. I mean, okay, so we say, well, the issue is that the teachers aren't happy with their salaries, and there will be right-wingers who say they're already overpaid. Well, hold on a second. Look at skyrocketing rent in Chicago. Look at cost of living. Look at transportation issues based on where a lot of the teachers have to live because of how expensive it is to live in Chicago proper, compared to the locations of the schools, which, as we know, often public transportation is a way to perpetuate segregation among class lines, race lines, whatever. So what seems like it's just about teacher salaries connects to, well, the reason that they need higher pay is because cost of living has exploded, and it relates to all of these other dynamics. So, I think the takeaway is, without being able to solve the Chicago public school problems from Boston, Massachusetts, as we sit today, I think that any reflexive black and white assessment of the situation, the teachers are just greedy. Any black and white assessment like that, Pat, is unlikely or basically guaranteed not to account for the full scope of what's going on.
Yeah, and we also can't make black and white assessments in the other direction too. We can't say that, the teachers in this case in the unions deserve everything that they want because
Sure.
you have the citizens of Chicago at large who are also impacted by this. It's going to affect their property taxes and all that. And if you have an expensive city that's tough to live in the first place and your property taxes go up, well, that affects you too. So
Of
yeah,
course.
I totally agree. You can't just come up with a black and white solution, and that's why we had these negotiations. And it's kind of unfortunate that these negotiations led to a point where the teachers had to leave the schools and strike, but hopefully that will at least create some sense of urgency and let kids return to classes within the next week or so.
Yeah, we'll follow up on this probably in the middle of next week. By the way, I will not be coming to you from Las Vegas next week. It was every 6 months I go to Las Vegas for this conference, which is it's really a legal conference headed up by Mike Papantonio from Ring of Fire, but it becomes sort of a progressive media meeting of the minds. And I have made the call, Pat, sad as it is, that in the interests of making a full recovery from my emergency appendectomy, it doesn't really make sense to be dealing with the 6-hour flight to Vegas, the jet lag, immediately going into broadcasting remotely, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sad because it is a great progressive meeting of the minds, but I will not be coming to you from Las Vegas next week, which I think the audience mostly doesn't care about. I'm just sitting in a different room.
Yeah, I mean, like the microphone quality isn't as good, and like the video quality typically isn't as good. So maybe they care from that perspective. But yeah,
dear.
they still at the end of the day, they just want to see David. It doesn't matter if David is at home in Boston or if he's away in Las Vegas. But according to, I went to Politicon's website.
Yeah.
And according to the Politicon website, you're scheduled for 2 events on Sunday. Is that going to be happening?
No, I have no signed contract with Politicon. I never had a signed contract with them. And at some point, listen, Sam Cedar recently told a story about Politicon. At some point, I may have a story to tell about Politicon, but I want to make sure a lot of the negotiations, I admit there were negotiations, a lot of the negotiations were happening through my agent. And so I need to make sure I clear with him what I am and am not allowed to say. But there is a story here, which I at some point hope to be able to tell. That does it for today. New show tomorrow and new bonus show tomorrow, hosted by producer Pat. There is a thread on the subreddit requesting suggestions for what Pat should do on the Friday bonus show. More on that tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.